Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here this evening on what has turned out to be a really beautiful day outside, contrary to the day we had yesterday. So we do appreciate you coming inside this evening to spend some time with us to talk about how we can support our youth. My name is Tracy Deagle, and I am the proud superintendent of Gahanna Jefferson Public Schools. And to my right is our Mayor, Lori Jadwin. You will hear from both of us here before we get started with our slideshows. In a very short amount of time my family and I have lived in Gahanna, I have found that our community is one that is really welcoming and dedicated to the success of our youth. Our schools are a place for collaboration and learning, wonder, and growth. And our students are gifted beyond measure. They are rich in their perspective, talent, and their promise. And they are most eager to thrive in their educational environment. Our youth really is amazing. And I wish that some of you could see our youth in their educational setting, because it would put a wide smile on your face. Yet, even given all of this, we do have some youth who are in crisis, and they need our support. To fulfill our promise as a district where students come first, I believe we need to have truthful, transparent conversations and bring solutions to the table.
Thank you, Dr. Deagle. As Dr. Deagle said, my name is Lori Jadwin. I have the distinct honor of serving as the mayor of the city of Gahanna, and I thank you all for being here this evening for this very important conversation. Gahanna is a fantastic community. It is the city that my husband and I chose over 30 years ago to grow our family. Both of our daughters were born and raised here. Proud graduates of the Gahanna Jefferson Public School System. And it's just a wonderful place to raise a family, as I said. It's a safe community. It's a warm and welcoming community. But as we have all seen, our youth and our teen today are facing challenges and pressures unlike anything that we experienced growing up. And because of that, it's very difficult for us to know how to help them, how to support them, and how to just be there for them. I've appreciated the strong collaboration that Dr. Deagle and I have had since she took over as superintendent. In just a few short months, we've developed, I think, a very strong working relationship, and it's just been wonderful for the whole community, because this is not, what we're going to talk about tonight is not a school issue. It's not a city issue. It's a community issue here in Gahanna, but it's an issue that many communities across the nation are facing. If you watch the news every morning, you will see that this is an issue that everyone is facing and trying to deal with. Since Dr. Deagle has been here, as I said, we've formed some strong collaborations, and she has as well with Chief Spence, who will be part of the panel. You're going to hear from him in a little bit as well. We've continued our dialogue to talk about opportunities as to what's happening in the schools, what's happening in the city, and how we align those efforts to best support everyone in our community. One of the very first conversations that Dr. Deagle and I had occurred last summer, shortly after you officially took over your role. Some of you may remember that we were experiencing some issues at our pools, to the point that we had to very rapidly change our pool rules in response to concerns and increasingly significant issues that we were experiencing with the behaviors of youth and teens, and quite frankly even adults at our pools, threatening, fighting, and overall just creating an uncomfortable environment for everyone else who was just there to enjoy a day at the pool with their families and their friends. Our conversations then, when we first saw those issues, we began to talk about how do we help the community? What do we do to support the youth and the teens? How can we work together? As a city, it's frustrating for me. I don't necessarily have the resources that the schools do, but us working together, what could we do to support the youth and teen in our community and to help our parents deal with that as well? So tonight's forum really is a product in many ways of those conversations that we started to have back, I think, in August of last year. Gahanna truly is an amazing community, and as Dr. Deagle said, we have amazing students throughout the district, throughout the city of Gahanna and in Jefferson Township. And we are a caring community, and I think that's why all of you are here tonight. So I look forward to having the conversation we're about to have to identify ways that we can work together, that we can support our youth and our teens, and to continue to make Gahanna just a wonderful place for our students to live, work, and stay. Thank you.
I would like to just run through a little bit of the format for this evening. There will be opportunities for us to receive your questions as you think of them through the night. And so if you have not yet gotten a note card, we do have 2 individuals in suits walking through the aisle, and we'll give you a note card where you can jot down any questions you may want to ask this evening. I will let you know that having done this format before in previous districts, we do find that often we get similar questions, and so we may combine question themes into one question for time's sake. We plan to have about 30 minutes to answer your questions. I will also, though, caution you that if it's a specific question about your family specifically or a situation specifically, we will not answer that in a public forum such as this, but we'd be happy to talk with you after. The spirit of this evening is to be one of solutions and transparency and conversation and supporting of our youth, and so I appreciate your mindset in that regard. You can see what we are going to cover here. I do want to, though, also introduce you to a few of our guests this evening who I'm so pleased to be with us. We have the members of our Board of Education here. We have our President, Burl Piccolontonio. We have our Vice President, Mrs. Daphne Mooring, Board Member, Mrs. Sue Horn, Board Member, Kara Coates, and Board Member, Mr. Dion Manley. We also have several of our PTO presidents here this evening. We have Emily Bernard from Middle School West, Sarah Narlock from Blacklick Elementary, Amy Dahlman from High Point, and Angelia Holliday from Blinken Elementary. I have also had the good fortune of creating some community partners beyond the city. From the YMCA, we have David Cepek here, and Shanna, said like a Clevelander, Shanna Nolan from the YMCA, as well as from a 254 Youth Center, we have Mark Hyde here. Thank you so much for being here. Many of our administrators are here as well in support, and we will introduce our principals to you here a little bit later. To begin for this evening, though, I would like to invite Lisa Kelly, our Administrator of School-Based Prevention and Counseling.
Good evening. As Tracy said, my name is Lisa Kelly. I have been privileged to work in this district for 10 years. This is my 10th year. Over the years, I've loved supporting our students, family, and staff, and I'm excited to share with you tonight some information about mental health. That's where we're starting tonight, is with the national story about mental health. The reason for that is because all of the national statistics that I'm going to present to you are highly reflective of what's going on here in Gahanna. So they're all very relevant. We are at a crisis level with mental health across the country, and I would echo that that is something that we also see here in Gahanna. So just some facts to just get us started. 1 in 5 children have some type of mental health condition, but almost half do not get treatment for it. So if you think about that, that's astounding. Almost half of our kids that need support in mental health are not getting it. There's a variety of reasons for that. It could be a financial barrier. It could also be that the parents maybe don't have time to, or the resources to link. It could also be, and what many of our parents are experiencing in the community, is that there simply are massive wait lists right now. Almost every parent that I have talked to, when they try to link their child, are being told that it will be months before their child can be seen by a provider. I had one parent reach out desperate for their child to be evaluated because they were so concerned, and the wait that they were told was 18 months. This is a reality that our society is facing everywhere, but specifically in Central Ohio. We actually just had an event with the clinical director of Children's Children's Hospital, and he was talking with me about how there's such a massive shortage in being able to even hire qualified providers for our kids. So the fact that half are not receiving treatment is likely due to factors such as that. We also know that suicide is the second leading cause of death in people ages 10 to 34. This is a reality in Gahanna regarding suicide ideation and attempts. We have seen an increase post-pandemic of children of all ages, and I'm talking all the way down to kindergarten, making comments about ending their lives. This is something that we deal with every single day in Gahanna. Our school counselors and our mental health team, we are regularly doing what we call risk assessments. We are contacting parents. We are linking them with providers. And we're also sometimes, quite frankly, sending them to Children's Hospital because we see it as such a serious safety concern. There's also been a significant increase in ER visits that are mental health related in children. So there's been a 24% increase in ages 5 to 11 and a 31% increase in ages 12 to 17. We see that in Gahanna too. We have definitely been sending more kids to the hospital than we have in years past, and more of our students are being hospitalized for mental health conditions. Lastly on this slide is a fact about the way that our young adults are feeling. 73% of young people are reporting sometimes or always feeling lonely. And while that might not seem like a big deal, it actually is. There's research that's come out that talks about how feeling isolated and alone can have the same impact on your physical health as smoking cigarettes. It also says that being lonely is something that can decrease your lifespan. So we have kids that we think, how could they be alone? They're always on their phones. They're always connecting with someone. But what they're reporting at large numbers is that they feel very alone. We got new data just recently from the CDC, and people like me were extremely excited to see it because we've been waiting for post-pandemic data. And this data was just released in January. It's the first data that was collected post-pandemic. It was collected in the fall of 2021. And what the CDC did was repeat the youth behavior survey that they've done in the past. Overall, what they found was that two subgroups were experiencing the most distress. So the subgroups that were experiencing high levels of mental distress, violence, and substance abuse predominantly were teenage girls and children who identify in the LGBTQIA+ community. The CDC data also showed that 37% of our young people reported experiencing poor mental health during the pandemic. I cannot stress enough how much we have seen this in Gahanna. The pandemic was very hard on us as adults, and if you think through what it would be like to be a child without a fully developed brain that can cognitively think and reason through the challenges of the pandemic, and then add in adolescents who are also going through puberty and having hormonal changes, this is definitely a thing that we've seen and that we continue to see. 44% of young people reported feeling persistently sad or hopeless during the last year. That is something that we also continue to see. I actually had a parent recently talk to me about her child's mental health issues, and she gave me permission to share tonight that she was really struggling to determine if her child's issues and mood fluctuations were related to puberty or if they were related to something else that was going on. And what they ultimately determined was that her child was struggling significantly with anxiety. And that can look very different in children than it does in adults. In adults, with our fully developed brains, we are able to say, I am feeling anxious and nervous. I am stressed out. But a child or a teenager who may not have the words or the coping strategies to adequately express that might lash out, might yell at you, might throw something, and it's not because they're truly angry, it's because anger is sad's bodyguard, as I tell the kids that I work with, and there's something else that's going on there. 55% of our students, not our students, but children nationally also reported neglect during the pandemic while they were at home. So that's another factor that we have to consider too, is we were absent from children's lives as school providers for a long time. So 55% reported emotional abuse and 11% nationally reported physical abuse during the pandemic when they were under quarantine. Also from the CDC study, racism came out as a contributing factor. This is not something that we can overlook because what studies have found is that racism is a trauma and that children who experience racism have a tendency to also have to deal with chronic stress, depression, and anxiety. So racism is a direct factor in our children's mental health. So 36% reported experiencing racism either before or during the pandemic, and then 64% of Asian young people reported experiencing racism, and 55% of Black and multiracial young people reported it. So again, these are all factors that contribute to our kids' mental health and also to their behavior. Substance abuse is also on the rise, and we see this in Gahanna too. Since 2016, there's been a 61% increase in drug use amongst 8th graders. 62% of teenagers in 12th grade have abused alcohol. 50% of teenagers have misused a drug at least once. And there has been an 1,800% increase in teen vaping between 2011 and 2019. Those facts are astounding and very real. And one of the things that we do here in Gahanna is we not only monitor those things, but we also try to address them and give our children resources and understandings of how hurtful these substances can be in their body. From the national data, I want to give us a picture of what's going on here in Gahanna. The best way for me to do that is to let our kids' voices speak to you. Twice a year, we give a survey called the Panorama Survey. The Panorama Survey is given to 13 million students nationwide, and it's given in 23,000 schools. It is a student perception survey, so meaning we ask kids in grades 3 through 12 how they specifically feel about their own social and emotional competencies and how they feel about the supports and environments that we provide for them at school. This is important to note that it's not teachers filling this out on their behalf or parents filling it out on their behalf. This is truly the kids are filling this out and telling us how they think and feel. Within the Panorama Survey, there are lots of what we would call subscales of areas that we can measure and get their input on. Gahanna has selected a handful that we continue to give so that we can look at apples to apples and see if we're making growth in areas that we're targeting. One of the areas that we are very much targeting and have been on our radar since we started the Panorama is sense of belonging. Sense of belonging is a subscale anywhere between 5 and 6 questions depending upon the grade level. And what it measures is how much students feel that they are valued members of the school community. So that is so critical for us in Gahanna. We want every single student to feel safe and supported and loved when they walk through our doors. What our data told us is that that's not the case right now. In our 3 through 5 group, 72% of our students answered favorably, meaning that they answered that yes, they do feel like they belong here. In our 6 through 12 groups, we only had 40% of our students answer favorably. That's a red flag for us. We are owning that, we are targeting it, we are trying to dig into it to make that better. If you look at a specific question from the sense of belonging subscale, one of the questions that we really try to dig into every year is, overall, how much do you feel like you belong at your school? So again, you can see the same discrepancy between elementary and secondary. So at the elementary level, 72% of our students answer that question favorably, which is actually a 2% increase from our last administration, which was in the spring. And our secondary students, 50% answered that favorably, which is a 2% increase, but it still tells us that half of our kids are not feeling like they belong in our schools, and that's something that we need to do something about. Another area that we thought might be relevant tonight for our discussion is emotional regulation. So again, this is us asking kids, how well do you regulate your emotions? This specifically looks at how well students regulate how they feel and how well they can navigate those emotions. So you can see overall, on the overall scale, which again is comprised of 4 to 6 questions, 57% of our students in grades 3 through 5 answered favorably that they feel like they are able to do that, and 52% of our secondary students. So those are not super high numbers. And we know that. And so we want our students to feel empowered to be able to regulate their emotions and to be able to navigate them. Part of it is developmental. Regulating your emotions is hard, and it's especially hard when you have an underdeveloped brain. Our brains don't get fully developed until we're about 26. So our kids are at a disadvantage there because their prefrontal lobe that helps with that regulation piece is not quite online yet. But we can still give them tools and strategies to help them and to assist them. A question from this scale that I wanted to highlight is, when things go wrong for you, how calm are you able to stay? So when asked that, 53% of our 3-5 students responded favorably, as in they are able to stay calm. They feel like they're able to stay calm. That is an exact same score as we had from the previous administration. In our secondary level, 49% of our students answered that favorably, which is 3 points higher than our spring administration. But I think you would agree with me. I'm a parent. I certainly want my kids to be able to regulate their emotions, and so we want to see these scores go up too. The last Panorama subscale that I want to highlight for you is school safety. So again, this is us asking for our kids' opinions on how safe do you feel in our buildings. This subscale specifically looks at the perception of the student's physical and psychological safety at school. So it's not just do I physically feel safe, it's also do I feel psychologically safe. So at the elementary level, 65% of our students answered that favorably, that yes, they do feel safe in Gahanna schools. 49% of our 612 students answer that question as favorable. So again, we have areas of growth to do. We want our kids to feel like they belong and that they feel safe with us. There's a couple questions I wanted to highlight in this area due to the topic that brought us here tonight. The first is, how often do you worry about violence at your school? So the reason why I included the answer distribution in this slide is because I think that this is tricky to understand. Because 54% favorable, like what exactly does that mean? So what that means is that 54% of our kids answered in the green. So you see those green blocks, those are favorable responses. So there's 5 choices for kids on Panorama questions. And in order for our data to reflect it as favorable, they had to answer either almost never do I fear violence at my school, or once in a while I fear violence at my school. Those are the 2 favorable responses. Sometimes feeling like there could be fearing violence at my school or worrying about it, frequently or almost always, those do not count towards favorability. So you can see that 54% of our kids said they almost never or just once in a while worry about violence at our school. And that's honestly just not high enough. So that's something that we want to really look at and think through. How can we help our kids to feel more safe? At the elementary level, the other question that I wanted to highlight, and then I'll go into secondary, is how often do students get into physical fights at your school? So again, I included the answer distribution here because I think that it's a confusing way to look at it. But to be considered favorable, students had to either answer, I almost never see other students get into physical fights at my school, or once in a while. So those are the 2 favorable responses. And we don't set this criteria, Panorama does. This is a nationally norm referenced assessment that creates norms from Panorama based off of the millions of kids that take it. And then sometimes, frequently, and almost always are all considered not favorable answers. So 73% of our kids said that they almost never or just once in a while see students get into physical fights. And that is, again, at the elementary level. At the secondary level, with the same questions, you'll notice a little bit of a difference. How often do you worry about violence at your school? So we had 58% there, which obviously is definitely different from the elementary. I shouldn't say a little bit of a difference, but it's definitely different. And that's up 6 points from last spring. So that means that we're actually increasing how students feel safety-wise when it comes to thinking about violence at their schools. And then the next question of how often do students get into physical fights at your school, we're at 34% there. Now, that is up 12 points from spring administration. So again, we are making gains, but obviously the fact that almost 70% of our kids see that there's physical fighting at our school, either sometimes, frequently, or almost always, is unacceptable. So these are just some examples of, from our student lens, what's going on in Gahanna regarding some of these topics. Now I am going to pass off the microphone.
My name is Jill Elliott, and I am the assistant superintendent in the district. This is my 6th year in this role, but this is my 20th year in education, and 18 of those have been in Gahanna. And I also grew up in Gahanna schools, so I've been here quite a long time. Thank you to Lisa for sharing that insightful perception data. Another important set of data that helps to tell about our students' experience is our code of conduct violation data, or our discipline data. What I wanted to share here tonight is, important to take into consideration what we heard about the student perception data, because we have definitely seen an increase in those social emotional needs, and we also know that our students' behaviors continue to speak out loud, signaling a need for greater structure and support. Okay, so as we began analyzing the data, we wanted to make sure that we took a deeper look at pre-pandemic data compared to what we're experiencing right now in our schools. And we pulled a few different sets of data, but we made sure that we wanted to compare apples to apples. And so what we're showing tonight is a comparison from our 1920 school year data, which happens to be when we shut down for the pandemic in March, compared to this year's current data, which also is March. So we've got that apples to apples comparison that worked out nicely for us. We also looked at last year's data specifically, and that was a full year's worth of data. And though we did see a spike after the pandemic, we seem to see our trends coming down a little bit, so that's positive. The specific data on the screen shows raw numbers for you, related specifically to substance abuse, which we heard some national data related to earlier this evening, as well as physical altercations, which we know is a concern of ours and a concern of community members as well. There are 3 categories that you'll see that we pulled related to substance abuse: alcohol, drugs other than tobacco and alcohol, and alternate nicotine delivery devices, also known as vape. The left side boxes show combined data for all 3 of our middle schools. And though it's still concerning, you can see we've had low occurrences of substance abuse infractions at the middle school. On the right side, the boxes show a decrease in our alcohol infractions at the high school, a pretty steady data point for drugs other than alcohol and tobacco, which would include marijuana and THC. And then our alternate nicotine delivery device infractions are down by 5 instances in this comparison. The next slide shows data related to physical altercations. And it was interesting to sit and listen to Lisa talk about the perception of our students and how their favorable responses were. This includes infractions coded as fighting or assault, and the data includes physical altercations at the elementary level as well as our secondary buildings. So at the left, you can see a pretty significant decrease in the individual instances involving physical altercations at the elementary level since the pandemic, pre-pandemic, which is a positive. The middle school and high school data both show an increase, with the middle school going up by about 40% and the high school increasing approximately 12%. Like you all, these numbers are concerning to us, but also a very important part of our students' stories. At this time, Chief is going to come up, and he's going to share a little bit about city-specific data.
How you doing? Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak before you. My name is Jeff Spence. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of Gahanna. I've been in this role for a little over 4 years. In that time, we've seen a dramatic shift in not only law enforcement and law enforcement operations, but also the types and calls for service. The manner in which we police has fundamentally changed over the last few years. And as Lisa pointed out, the mental health situation in our community, as our schools go, is really reflective of a broader situation in our community. It affects everyone. This is some data about the number of mental health calls. I go back to my early days in policing, and there was no such thing as critical incident response. There was no such thing as de-escalation. De-escalation in 1992 was pepper spraying somebody because that was the way of arrest. That was essentially the only service that we were providing in those early days of policing. And I can tell you that now we focus on mental health response, de-escalation, critical incident trauma care, a wide range of services that just were unheard of in the infancy of my law enforcement career, that we spend exponentially more and more time. We average a little over, in the last 3 years, approximately 700 plus mental health calls for service. When somebody's in crisis, when they're facing an addiction issue, when there's a family member in crisis and trauma, that they may be considering suicidal thoughts or any number of wide range of issues that's affecting them or their loved one, sometimes the only resort is to call 911. You call 911, in about 2.5 seconds, you're going to reach one of our communications technicians here in Gahanna, and a police officer is going to respond. Those officers are highly trained in critical stress and critical incident response, but we're not mental health clinicians. That's one of the things that, as Lisa mentioned, that we are in great need of professionals in the mental health field, because all of those folks in the field that helped us, Children's Services, the Office on Aging, all those clinicians that were out in the field and providing us immediate resources, they've evaporated, they've gone away. They've gone into safer environments like hospital settings or into private practice offices. They're not available to us. So we're having to make do with what we have, those resources that are immediately available to us. Again, about 700 calls for service. Those have exponentially increased from prior to the pandemic, when they were about 200 or 300 calls in a year. Now there's 700 plus. I think we'll probably surpass 800 this year, 800 calls for service. Those calls take exponentially more time. They take officer resources. There are usually multiple officer calls, sometimes 2 officers, sometimes more, depending on what that situation needs to be managed. Sometimes that takes an exponential amount more of time of the officer, because they're trying to coordinate potentially an emergency admission to a hospital, Nationwide Children's Hospital, Ohio State University, those things. That takes time, and that takes those officers to handle that situation. And then also the follow-up that's necessary, maybe get some services to family members. As you can see, these calls have increased. This is where we are. The April number is low because the March number is low for 2023. We're trending a little bit downward, but I can tell you the hours that we're spending are increasing. With that, as we've mentioned, safety is of paramount importance to us in the schools, and we are seeing, next slide, we are seeing an exponential increase in juvenile-related behaviors, criminal behavior. I think if you turn on the television, and that's a very real challenge for us here in Gahanna. We have a relatively safe community when it comes to incidents of crime, but the fear of crime, the perception of crime is as real as turning on your television every night and watching what's going on around us. One of the things that we've seen is an escalation, especially with youth, in terms of criminal behavior. It starts at low-level property crimes, thefts from vehicles. Gahanna is plagued with a number of thefts from vehicles, often committed by youth, that quickly escalates. It escalates into stolen vehicles, and I'll touch on stolen vehicles here in a minute, because we've seen an explosion, and this is across the country, of youth involved in stolen vehicles. Auto theft quickly escalates into strong arm robbery, carjackings, possession of weapons, possession of drugs. Weapons are becoming very much a reality for us. I often say, and I've mentioned this many times when speaking of auto theft, we'll have vehicles stolen in Gahanna, and when they're recovered, oftentimes left behind are weapons, are firearms. They didn't belong to the owner of that stolen vehicle. They're left behind by those offenders. These numbers are out of Columbus, but they are reflective of where we are in Gahanna. In 2019, 4,400 stolen vehicles, and that ballooned in last year to over 8,000 stolen vehicles. A lot of times those are nonviolent but they are being committed by youth. Some of them are violent. Some of them are carjacking. Some of them are very serious offenses committed by younger and younger youth in the community. We tragically lost a member of our community, while not a resident, the manager at Marlowe's Cheesesteaks. He was killed down in South Columbus about a month and a half ago, January timeframe. He was murdered by a 15-year-old over a stolen car. So this does have an impact on us. While there are a lot of positives out there, there are some barriers to the work and some of the things that happen in the community. I did have a great opportunity last summer to work with some organizations in the inner city, myself and a few other police chiefs, the chief of police in Whitehall. He and I worked with some community groups in the King Lincoln district and in Linden to try to get a handle on some youth crime. We learned a lot from community leaders, some people like, some organizations like Mothers of Murdered Columbus Children, which is a fantastic organization. But they really kind of humanize what's going on with our youth out there and some of the drivers. And I'll tell you, to be honest with you, it's a loss of hope. Some of these young people, they have no hope. It's a basic thing that we all kind of take for granted in our lives and thinking forward. And you think, well, why would they take such risks? Why would they engage in such, criminal behavior? And, what's that motivator? And really it's a loss of hope because they don't see themselves 5 years from now. They don't even see themselves alive, which is a tragic thing. But there are a lot of things that contribute to it. Cell phone technology, we really kind of, the personal interactions we used to cherish, at least in my day, which wasn't that long ago, 1980s, Tiffin, Ohio, rural community. We had a lot of interactions with each other. Those are kind of gone by the way of the electronic device. Poor modeling, I say this, we've lost a lot of the anchors in family, especially over the pandemic. Our family structures, mine in particular, took a hit. I think in many communities it did. You lost connections with some of not only your nuclear family, but some of your extended family. Desensitized to violence, especially among youth. There are so many studies. I'm not a mental health professional, but you can go out there and you can see it, you can feel it, everything from video games to just simply turning on the television. There is a loss of understanding the impact of violence. And a lot of times, some of these youth offenders, when you sit down and talk to them, they grow up from day one in a violent household. They grow up with domestic violence, substance abuse, mental health especially. Sometimes they're afraid to go home. It goes into that loss of hope. A very basic need of these young people is simply that four-letter word, and that's sometimes when you're talking to them and you're asking, why do you, frankly, why do you do what you do? And it comes back to that desensitizing to the violence, but it's also that core commodity of hope. Social media. I could go on for hours about social media. I understand that we're all anchored to it. We hate it. I think it cuts many ways, especially as we deal with youth, because there are a number of challenges for not only our children, because frankly, with social media, there's an emotional tie to it. There is a high at times to being on social media. There is a lot of violence on social media that's portrayed on social media, and there's a desire to emulate that violence. The drug culture, stacks of cash, guns, weapons, you name it, it's glorified at times. Social media plays into that. Social media also plays into it in many ways in a negative based on parents' reactions. They see something that they feel that they need to emphasize, and sometimes it gets beyond what that situation is and doesn't give a real understanding of what the problem or the situation may be. Access to drugs and weapons. We have We have a crisis, especially in Central Ohio, with guns and drugs. Weapons are prolific everywhere. There's again, with that desensitization to violence, there's a desire to have weapons. They're everywhere. We often are taking weapons off of younger and younger children. Sometimes when we engage with a young person and we look at their social media, they're often armed. They're often portraying themselves with guns and drugs and stacks of cash and trying to emulate a criminal lifestyle. Finally, I want to touch a little bit about the challenges within the criminal justice system. All of our systems, and I say that mental health, but our criminal justice system with youth is extremely taxed. It's stretched very thin, and I will tell you that an arrest of a juvenile is not the answer, because oftentimes that leads to much more repetitive recidivism. It doesn't provide the outcomes that you think potentially in an adult situation. Most children, and there are plenty of studies out there, if they're involved in criminal conduct, even if it's once or twice or several times, will age out of that conduct, age out of that criminal behavior over time, especially as they reach age of maturity or shortly into their early 20s. When you place a hold, a detainer on a child in a criminal case, the chances of them reoffending exponentially increases. If they are in a hold, they sometimes succumb to peer pressure of much more serious offenders that are in jail with them. The studies are out there that they engage in more risk-taking behavior, they engage in drug and alcohol abuse. It is not the answer. I will also tell you that the system is extremely taxed in Franklin County. The reality is, in every, with the exception of maybe domestic violence, in every misdemeanor case and in most felony cases, that if there's an arrest or a detention, it doesn't go beyond processing. That juvenile will be released back to the parent, back to some community member. And I'll be very honest with you, in Franklin County, there are 78 beds for the entire county when it comes to pre-trial detentions. So we're talking the worst of offenders. We have young people that are accused of homicide that are out on ankle monitors. I'd like to change that perception, but unfortunately that's how it is in the system that we're dealing with. Again, I can't tell you enough that those pre-trial and post-trial detentions have such a negative effect on youth. There are other remedies out there. There are other solutions. Is getting these kids help, getting them that simple element of hope goes a long way.
The next thing that we want to talk about is what we're doing. We've given you a lot of information that doesn't necessarily make, I'm sure you feel warm and fuzzy, but we are actively doing things to try to combat the crisis of the situation that we have with mental health in our schools, similar to like I said, what's going on in the nation. So the first thing I want to highlight is our mental health services. We are very fortunate. We have a very robust mental health program thanks to the support of our school board and our central office administration. In fact, it's such a model program that it was selected to be highlighted at a national conference later this month. Right now, we have 19 school counselors. Every building, every elementary school has one school counselor, with the exception of Blacklick and Lincoln Elementary. Due to their population sizes, they have 1.5. Every middle school has 1.5 counselor. Next year, every middle school will have 2 full-time counselors, which we're very excited about. And our high school has 6 full-time counselors. In addition to school counselors, we also have mental health specialists. We have 6 total, 5 full-time and 2 part-time. We have 4 mental health liaisons, and then we have 3 community partners that we work with. So the structure of our program, if you can picture a pyramid in your mind, the school counselors are our first line of defense. They're at the bottom of the pyramid. They're a universal service. Every child in Gahanna has unfettered access to their school counselor. That's what they're there for. Our school counselors are in the classrooms teaching lessons and front-loading and helping to teach emotional regulation. They're also doing small group work and seeing kids individually. Our mental health specialists are, the reason why they're called specialists is because they specialize in doing counseling with some of our most at-risk students. And so if you, again, picture a pyramid, our mental health specialists are at the top of the pyramid with some of our students that have the most significant needs, and they're providing long-term counseling with our students that need it. Our mental health specialists also, or our mental health liaisons also provide long-term counseling, but what's unique to the mental health liaison position is it was created after the pandemic specifically to reach out to and re-engage our students that we lost during the pandemic. There were quite a few students that just kind of disappeared. And so we wanted to strategically plan for how we can get them re-engaged and reconnected to us. So our liaisons do home visits, they support our families, they provide linkage for our families to community resources if they have deficits and needs, and then they also provide that counseling piece as well. Our community partners are primarily grant funded. We have a long-standing relationship with Concord Counseling, who provides us with a substance abuse clinician in district, along with 2 other prevention clinicians. That's funded through primarily a grant from the Adam H. Board, or the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board of Franklin County. We also have a relationship with I Am Boundless and WCAP Counseling, and they provide a counselor and a social worker at our title buildings, and we use title funds to pay for those. Our mental health team is very busy. We are busy every day. This is just a snapshot of what is going on in our building. So for individual visits for this school year, this is specifically visits that are done by our school counselors, which again are that tier 1 level of support. You can see that at the elementary level, we've had over 5,000 visits. And again, that could be kids who we call our frequent flyers, who might see the school counselor multiple times a day, multiple times a week. At the middle school level, we're at over 2,000, and at the high school level, we're almost at 5,000 for the year. We also do a lot of small groups. You can see at the elementary level, we have over 700 kids that have experienced some type of small group this year. At the middle school level, almost 400, and at the high school level, 95. Another program that we have that we're very proud of are Smart Labs, and they are emotional regulation rooms that all of our students have access to. They're in every single building. It's an idea that we based off of a concept from The Ohio State University, and every Smart Lab is equipped with calming strategies. You name it, it's in there. If you ever want to come and visit a Smart Lab, email me, because I think that you could see it as a very calm place to go. When our kids are dysregulated and they just need a quick break to get their brains back online, they can go to our Smart Lab and play with putty or journal or color or exercise if that's something that speaks to them and how they cope, and then they can go back to class. And so you can see that so far this school year, we've had 8,545 visits to the Smart Lab at the elementary level, 7,696 at the middle school level, and 1,293 at the high school level. So those are very busy places for us. They're regulated. We have a facilitator that works with the kids in there. The breaks are typically 5 to maybe 15 minutes tops, with the goal of just giving them time and space to take some deep breaths and to get back to learning. We also have a lot of evidence-based programming here in Gahanna, and you'll hear me say evidence-based programming a lot. That means that the programs that we use have evidence behind them to say that they are effective and that they work. So these are just a few examples, just a handful of some of the evidence-based programming that we have. So we have Green Dot at the high school. Green Dot is a bystander intervention training program. It's implemented at the high school for grades 10 through 12. Last year, 142 students were trained in proactive ways to step in and diffuse situations that might escalate to violence. At the high school, we also have Hope Squad. This is a 9 through 12 program. It's a peer-to-peer prevention program. So students are nominated by their peers if they are seen to be someone that's trustworthy that another student would go to if they were in distress. And then those students are trained in how to support other students that might be feeling suicidal or depressed. Part of that training is to get an adult to help. But what we know about research about suicide is that children who actually complete suicide typically always tell a friend or peer before they do it. And so this is a means to try to prevent things like that from happening by providing those peers and giving those peers training. We also do signs of suicide. We do signs of suicide at the 7th grade and at the 10th grade. Signs of Suicide is an evidence-based program that contains a lesson for students that's done by our counseling team and our health teacher, specifically on what are the signs that a friend could be suicidal, how do you know if you need to seek help for yourself, and then at the end of the presentation, all of the students are given a very brief survey called the BSAD that lets us know if they need any assistance. We score those surveys live and in time. When we do SOS, we deploy whole teams to buildings. We score those surveys as they come in, and we pull within that day any student that is a red flag that we know needs assistance. And we always follow up with parents and then potentially link them with services. Every year, we flag at least over 200 kids between the 7th grade and the 10th grade. ROCKS is another evidence-based program that we have. It's done for 20 weeks. It's specifically for girls. You have to be a trained facilitator, which we are fortunate to have trained facilitators in our district. It teaches girls leadership skills, communication skills. It teaches them confidence. It's a great program. We've had really solid results and input from the girls who have been able to do it. So far this year in Gahanna, about 100 girls have been able to participate. We've already talked about Smart Labs. The last program that I'm going to highlight is this year we are piloting a peer-to-peer mentoring program to try to help those students that may feel disconnected and lack that sense of belonging. Right now we're doing it with middle school big buddies connected to elementary little buddies, and we've strategically selected kids who we think would really benefit from it and need to feel that connection with someone that has shared life experiences or that has common interest. The plan with this peer-to-peer mentoring program, it's part of our equity work, is to expand it to the entire district over the next 2 years. We also have in Gahanna something called MTSS, or Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. Multi-tiered systems of support, if you look at the triangle that's on the slide, is essentially a strategic way that we address academic, you can see on one side, and then social, emotional, and behavior needs on the other side. Just as I talked about with the school counseling team having that universal approach, we have universal academic instruction that's available to all students, and then we continue up. Like if a student is struggling with reading, then they'll go into a tier 2 intervention. If they're continuing to struggle, they might go into a tier 3 intervention. Similarly with our behavior and social emotional support, we go up the tiers just as I described in our mental health model. Part of MTSS is our PBIS, or Positive Behavioral Intervention and Supports Program. PBIS is under the umbrella of MTSS, and I apologize for using so many acronyms, but it's basically about using and maximizing the selection of evidence-based programming and intervention practices in that multi-tiered system so that we can address social, emotional, and behavioral needs. There are key components to PBIS that are around our district. Now, I'm going to be very honest in that we are not consistent with PBIS across the district, and I'm going to talk more about ways that we're going to refine that here in a little bit. But the key systems, the key components of PBIS are defining and teaching behavior expectations, having some form of recognition system for positive behavior when it's demonstrated, having a consistent consequence system, having a classroom management system, bullying prevention, and then parent engagement. If you think about the schools that your children attend, you could probably think through different components that you see. Every building in Gahanna has some elements of PBIS. We're working to strengthen that, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Just want to talk a little bit about the Division of Police, our role in supporting the schools. We have a school resource officer program. It's been in existence well over a decade. We have 3 school resource officers. 2 are anchored at Gahanna Lincoln High School. The third officer floats to the elementary schools, the middle schools within the district, and also some of our private schools, because those are also areas of risk and areas that we need to focus on from a safety perspective. This past year, we added a community liaison officer. Her role in the community is really to work amongst the many nonprofits, our social service providers, our civic associations, our community leaders, to kind of bridge the gap between us as a law enforcement service provider, also some of the things with our Mifflin Township Division of Fire, our community paramedic program, but deal with a lot of our touch points, like mental health, people in crisis, shut-ins. There's many different roles that community liaison focuses on. Unfortunately, I think she got quickly overwhelmed with the volume of work and all of the needs that the community has. We continue to work on that program and to also have some outreach into the schools. Our Books and Badges program she runs, and it's really taking off. The other thing, we've worked with Dr. Deagle, myself. We've had some hits on YouTube and some of our social media channels. We've done some public service announcements related to a wide range of topics. We did one not too long ago on guns and gun safety, and actually that must have had a far-reaching effect, because I did hear from a peer chief in another state who saw it. So I was very, very happy. I thought that came out well. So thank you, Dr. Deagle. Other things in terms of collaboration and availability, programming with our Parks and Recreation, especially in the summer, that bridge for our youth, not only from a programming standpoint, but also employment opportunities, lifeguards and camp counselors, and there's also touch points in camps and at the pools in a positive way with the division members, our community liaison. We've done Books and Badges in our camps as well. But our parks, and I've got Stephanie Farrell, our parks director down there, they do a fantastic job of really bridging that gap over the summertime and providing a wide range of services to our youth. And there's a lot in terms of development, leadership potential, with employment opportunities, an opportunity to give back to the community. So another excellent program is that summer work program and all the good work that they do. So thank you.
So I want to talk through some of the ways that we are working on expanding and enhancing our PBIS programming. So as I said previously, all of our schools have some elements of PBIS. What we are strategically working on, and we have been working on it since August, are ways that we can refine the process to make it consistent across the district, with a plan to roll out training and new supports regarding PBIS for our teachers and administrators for next school year. Our plans are to look at thoughtful development of a behavior matrix for every building. Some of you probably have seen behavior matrix in schools. If you walk into a school and you see a large poster of the behavior expectations for the building, that's a behavior matrix. We want to make sure that every building has one specific for them so that kids can see it and that we're explicitly teaching the behaviors throughout the year. We also are working on streamlining our behavior data collection. Right now, we all use one system, but it's open to interpretation. It's probably the best way for me to put it. So we are working on a streamlined way so that one incident would be recorded the same way as Middle School South as it would at Middle School East, as it would at Middle School West. We're also going to be adding in staff time every month to regularly look at our behavior data and reflect on it. Part of PBIS is diving into your discipline referrals. Who are you referring? Is there a specific trend that we can notice? How can we address that trend and directly work on it and target it instead of just letting it go on and on and on? We are also going to be looking at increasing parent engagement regarding PBIS. You as parents should know what's going on with PBIS in your buildings. You should be able to ask your child about it and have a clear understanding, and so we'll be working on increasing that. And then we'll also be working on increasing consistent uses of positive behavior recognition systems.
Another step we'll be taking to help address the needs of our students throughout the district is implementing restorative practices. Restorative practices are directly connected to the PBIS work that Lisa just shared about, and we've already begun this work with our administrators and some of our school staff members in a few buildings across the district. This is also a part of our Equity and Access for All plan. Restorative practices is a way of thinking and being based on a foundation of caring, collaboration, and respectful relationships. It cultivates a sense of community and supports well-being and academic success. A restorative approach in school shifts the emphasis from managing behavior to focusing on building, nurturing, and repairing relationships. It does not mean we won't have high expectations for behavior and interactions. Rather, it means we will hold students to very high standards and give them the support they need to become responsible and productive. There's a proactive side and a responsive side to restorative practices, but they're all rooted in strategies that help strengthen relationships between individuals and within the community. On the proactive side, restorative practices includes techniques that encourage direct communication, including outlining consistent and common language that will be used with our students by all administrators, teachers, and support staff. It also includes implementing strategies that address conflict as it arises in a respectful, compassionate, and direct manner. On the responsive side, restorative practices hold students accountable for their actions by involving them in face-to-face meetings with the people they've harmed rather than simply punishing them. Restorative practices take an intentional look at the harm caused by decisions and behavior and aim to engage those directly and indirectly impacted so that reflection, learning, and healing can occur. In addition to PBIS enhancements and restorative practices implementation, we plan to do several other things. First on this slide mentions bringing back Community University, and this is a practice that we have had in place in the past. We halted a bit due to the pandemic, but we will be bringing back Community University next year, which will provide sessions for parents, guardians, and community members to come together and learn about things such as our school clubs, instructional strategies and tools, parent supports on mental health, what to look for related to drug and social media trends, as well as partnership opportunities. We'll also be implementing small learning communities, which are already in place in some of our schools and a component of our PBIS system. This will provide family groups within our schools that meet regularly with a component of social emotional learning and community building. Cell phones are often the root of many peer and behavior situations in our schools, and we currently have various cell phone practices implemented across the district. In some schools, no cell phones are allowed. In others, cell phones are accessible most of the day. So we'll be looking at the struggles and successes in our buildings related to cell phones and putting consistent practices in place so that the focus can be on teaching and learning. The last future support on this slide references a pilot we'll be implementing next year with a curriculum called Catch My Breath. This is a vape prevention curriculum that all sixth graders will be exposed to in their health classes, and we have the hope then of expanding that to the elementary and high school level in years after that. This slide highlights 3 more ways we'll be working to be responsive to student needs. The first involves studying and revising the high school schedule. We plan to engage students, staff, and families to gather feedback about possible changes to the structure of the high school schedule, which also includes school start times. The goal would be to implement some changes in the 24-25 school year. Something we're currently working on developing a plan for is an alternative school option for students that may be struggling in our current buildings. We often get asked if there's another option for students that exists outside of our buildings. We currently have some alternative options within our schools, but there are several surrounding districts with alternative programs outside of their schools that we've been visiting, reflecting on, learning from, and so you can look for more information related to that in the future. And finally, on this slide, for school supports, we continue, as always, to work on improving our instructional strategies so that student engagement and learning are improved. We know that traditional school is not necessarily the best learning for all students. So over the past year, we've been working with a BOLD cohort at the high school to study and practice inquiry learning. And that's something that we will be sharing and expanding to the rest of the high school staff next school year.
I'm just going to speak a little bit briefly here about city supports. A couple of things that have already been mentioned. I know Chief mentioned our Parks and Recreation programming. Certainly, I think we've identified, and Director Farrell, as Chief mentioned, is sitting here, we've identified that sometimes we have a dearth of programming opportunities available for some of the age ranges that are most impacted by some of the issues that we've heard today. So partnering with our community partners at the Y, our school resources, such as Lisa sitting behind us, to identify ways that we can expand our recreational programming, specifically directed to those age groups that really need to have opportunities within the community. What kind of programs can we offer? How do we get them engaged? The mission of our Parks and Recreation Department is health and wellness. It's the health and wellness of our community. So looking for opportunities to integrate programming to help support some of the issues that we've heard here today will be certainly a priority for us going forward. Along those lines, one of the additions that we have in 2023 is the hiring, and we created a new position, and we'll be hiring a mental health clinician to work with our Gahanna Division of Police. They also will be partnering with Mifflin Township, dividing duties and supporting our first responders as they encounter situations where people are in crisis, helping to provide resources for them, not only in de-escalating situations, but then what happens beyond that encounter. As Chief mentioned, the resources at Franklin County are extremely taxed. When we call Franklin County sometimes for support for those types of issues, the phone will ring and ring and ring, and it can be days before we get a response back when we're really trying to help somebody in crisis. So having somebody on staff that's available to provide those resources will be extremely helpful for our community. And we also look forward to a collaboration between that role and the mental health clinicians you've heard identified that currently work for the district. And finally, I would just say, as I mentioned at the outset, we are one community. This is not a school issue, it's not a city issue, it's a community issue, and it's up to all of us to find solutions and to help support the youth and teen issues that we're seeing today. I think one of our efforts is the continued collaboration and communication that we have with the district. I speak with Dr. Deagle many times in a week. Sometimes. I think she's tired of seeing my phone number come up on her phone. But also one of the new initiatives that we have several school board members here. So the school board president, their city liaison on school board, and Dr. Deagle meets regularly now with myself, with our council president, and with our school board liaison on council. And we meet on a quarterly basis to talk about projects in between the city and the schools, opportunities for alignment, how we can best support one another. So we look forward to continuing this dialogue in the context of those discussions. And we look forward to working again with all of you.